Good afternoon. A lot has changed over the last 12 months since I last was here at this meeting to present as President CEO of Altogen. In February of this year, Altogen and Cytomedix were merged. And so it's my privilege to tell you a little bit about the Cytomedix story. And what I'll do, I think, today is really talk about the things that have occurred since the merger to move the company forward. Cytomedix is a public company, so here's our forward look at statements. So as I mentioned, the merger occurred in February between Cytomedix and Altogen. The rationale was to try to create a leadership position in autologous therapies by combining a commercial product line with a very robust clinical pipeline of cell therapies. And I think that's what we've accomplished with this merger. The commercial products that we have, which I'll talk about, we think are on the verge of significant growth, and we think ability to generate cash flow that can actually help fund the development of therapies. I'll talk a little bit about the pipeline of cell therapies that we have ongoing, including a phase 2 study in stroke, which we think, if positive, will be a landmark study for this area. And I think importantly for these type of deals to work out, there has to be a common vision. And I think both organizations felt that autologous therapies offered both safety and efficacy advantages. And we also have technologies that are complementary in the sense that we believe that fractionating out active components of either blood or bone marrow are essential to making efficient and efficacious products. So now we are a company that's focused on developing and commercializing autologous therapies by harnessing two of the regenerative capacities that we all have, platelets and adult stem cells. And as I mentioned, this is a company now that is fully integrated. We have a sales force, we have R&D, we have our own manufacturing facility for our cell therapies, so a unique footprint for a company in this space. So this is what the pipeline looks like. As I mentioned, we've got two commercial products based in the area of platelet-rich plasma, an area that's gotten a lot of press recently, mainly in the sports area. The first product is Autologel. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is a distinct formulation of PRP put into a gel that's used in the wound care area. And then we have another product called Angel, which is a point-of-care device that allows you to separate out platelet-poor plasma and platelet-rich plasma for a variety of indications in orthopedic, cardiac, and sports injury. It's kind of the, I like to say, it's the Mercedes of the PRP world in terms of devices, because it's the only device that allows you to actually change the concentrations of platelets as well as change the hematocrits that you get. And what we're hopeful to do is to change this field so that it is formula-driven or formulation-driven, depending on the indication that you want to use. And then in the cell therapy area, we have a platform of cell therapies based on the technology isolating cells based on an intracellular stem cell marker. So a lot of people use cell surface markers. We're using the only intracellular marker called ALDH to identify cell therapies. As I mentioned, ALD401 is in a phase 2 for ischemic stroke. I'll talk a little bit about that, and then a number of other products that I'll mention briefly. So in terms of what's happened this year to move the company forward, this is probably the major event that has happened on our commercial side. So as I mentioned, Autologel is a system you see here. It's a point-of-care centrifuge you see on the left, and then a reagent system that allows for you to gel the platelets that are isolated from a patient's blood and then put that onto a wound. And it's a broad-based platform. It's looking at diabetic foot ulcers, venous ulcers, and pressure ulcers, and we've got clinical data in all those areas. And we went to CMS for coverage for this product, and actually in August got a final decision that we would get coverage under CED, which is coverage under evidence development. It's used by CMS to actually cover products while you're still collecting some of your clinical data. And you can see here in the quote, this was actually from the final decision memo, that they really do believe that this therapy has promise in the patient populations that CMS cares for. And in this market, over half of the patients that have these type of ulcers are actually covered through CMS. This is a big news for us, and we'll actually be moving forward under the CED program later this year and early next year. On the cell therapy side, we had two clinical publications of data from trials that we've finished. One was in the area of critical limb ischemia with our product ALD301. There we actually gave our cell therapy to patients that were in-stage CLI patients at risk of losing their limb to amputation. And then just briefly, what we were able to show there is that our cells were able to improve perfusion in the limbs of these patients. and then that led to an improvement in clinical outcome. About 40% of the patients that we treated no longer had critical limb ischemia after we treated them, and they moved into a category called intermittent claudication, which means they were only at pain and motion, but more importantly, their limbs were no longer at risk for amputation. The second publication that was done this year on another clinical trial that we did at the Texas Heart Institute was looking at heart failure patients. These are end-stage patients looking at either heart replacement or no other real therapeutic option. We directly injected these cells into the myocardium, and you can see here on the bottom, looked at a max VO2, which is an exercise capacity measure of these patients, and in the ALDH treated group, we actually saw an improvement there that was greater than any other cell therapy type that's been done in these patient populations. So, very positive kind of data from our trials that we've already done in the cardiac space with these cells. But we've really turned our attention to what we think is the biggest opportunity for our cell product, and that's in the stroke area. There's been a lot of dead bodies in the stroke area, to say the least. We're attracted to this for a number of reasons. One is obviously that it is a significant unmet need, large costs, high incidence, no therapeutic options other than TPA, which is used by or given to about 3 to 5% of the patients. But I think importantly, it's an area that it's a complex disorder. And single agents, single targeted agents have not been successful here, and we think this is where cell therapy actually has its greatest opportunity. So we've moved into a large phase 2 study. It's called the Recover Stroke Trial. It's a 100-patient randomized 60-40 double-blind study with a sham control. This past year, we've moved through the safety roll-in phase of this study, which is 10 subjects. We've had no safety concerns with the cell product. We're now moving up to a number of sites. We're up to about, I think, 10 sites as of now, enrolling patients. And a couple really unique aspects to this trial. One is that we are giving these cells about 2 weeks after the stroke. So we don't have an acute timing window that we have to get into with the cells. The animal studies that we've done at 2 weeks showed significant improvement. Biologically, it makes sense for us to move outside of the acute inflammatory window that occurs within the first 3 to 5 days and still be in the first month window where you're actually seeing some endogenous repair of cells. The other thing we're doing here is looking at patients that are stable. So we're getting patients that have an NIH stroke scale of 7 to 22, and that they have to be stable for 3 days prior to enrollment. This takes a lot of the noise out of doing a clinical trial in stroke that's very difficult to do in the acute phase. And by doing that, we think based on doing 100 patients, we can actually see a strong enough signal on our primary endpoint, which is modified Rankin score, which is an endpoint that the FDA would accept for phase 3 approval. We can see enough, we can get enough data in this trial to actually power a phase 3 because of the avoidance of that noise in the acute phase. So we're excited about this study and ongoing. As I said, the safety so far has been promising. And then to build off of that study, we announced in September another study of a product, ALD-451, in an area that's somewhat linked to the stroke area, and that is that these are looking at patients with glioblastoma or brain cancer. And we're not trying to treat cancer. What we're trying to treat here is the fact that when patients get this cancer, they get surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, and the side effect of that is that they have significant deterioration of neurocognitive function. So we're trying to give our cells during that process to improve neurocognitive function and quality of life of those patients. So it is an open label study. And this will be given IV, unlike the stroke that's given intracarotid. And interestingly enough, this was paid for actually by Duke University's Robertson program and funded by Julian Robertson, who's given a lot of money to the stem cell area, both in New York and down at Duke University. So going forward over the next 12 months, we have a number of important milestones. One is we will, I think, announce another third-party funded trial with ALDH bright cells, building off some of the work we've done in the PAD area. I mentioned we'll initiate the CED studies for autologous in all of the wound types that I mentioned, diabetic foot ulcer, venous, and pressure ulcers. We're also looking at getting FDA and CE clearance for the Angel processing system in bone marrow. Right now, we just have it for whole blood, and for those who know the space, having a bone marrow indication will open up a number of opportunities. And then next year, we will have the data from the stroke study, top-line data coming from that. And then even though we are a commercial organization, we have our own sales force, we're also looking for partnerships in the wound care area with Autologel and the orthopedic area with Angel to continue to improve or expand our scope of coverage to some of those markets. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and appreciate your interest.